Right now, above us, Barcelona is moving. Metro trains rattle through the dark. Delivery vans squeeze past tourists in the Gothic quarter. Thousands cross streets that look medieval, never suspecting that another city is still holding its shape beneath their feet. Roman walls survive inside later buildings. Workshops sleep beneath a palace. 4 columns remain where a temple once watched over the entire settlement. And under a modern hotel, archaeologists recently uncovered paving stones that forced them to redraw the ancient city itself. In a few moments, everything modern will fall away. We are returning to the Roman colony of Barcino to spend one complete day inside its walls and walk through a city rebuilt from what archaeology can prove and from what the surviving evidence allows us carefully to imagine. Dawn touches the Mediterranean first. The sea is darker than the sky, and the shoreline sits closer to the town than it does today. There is no modern harbor here, no Ejempla grid, no cathedral spire, no Sagrada Familia reaching into the distance. Just a compact walled town, rising on a low hill called Mons Tabor. Beyond it, the plain runs toward wooded hills, cut by roads, fields, vineyards, streams, and country estates. To the southwest, Montjuic rises, the quarry that gave this city its stone. From here, Barcino looks almost modest. That's our first surprise. The Roman ancestor of Barcelona covers barely 10 hectares. It may hold no more than a few thousand people. By the middle of the 2nd century AD, Barcino has belonged to Rome for generations. It was probably founded between 15 and 10 BC under Augustus, although some scholars argue for an earlier beginning. Its ceremonial name proclaimed Roman status and loyalty to imperial power. Yet its population was never simply transplanted from Italy. Iberian families, settlers, merchants, citizens, freed people, laborers, enslaved people, and travelers all shaped the town. Roman institutions supplied the framework. Daily life came from people of different origins and positions. Barcino was not one people arriving on an empty coast. It emerged through mixture, ambition, opportunity, labor, and inequality. The road draws us toward the gate facing the sea, and morning traffic is already thick. A cart groans past, amphorae packed tightly in straw. A farmer urges forward an animal loaded with baskets. Fishermen carry the night's catch inland, the smell of salt still clinging to them. Timber, cloth, oil, vegetables, pottery, and wine press toward the entrance, while letters, tools, payments, and finished goods flow outward. The air carries seawater, damp earth, smoke, animals, and food beginning to cook behind the walls. Nothing is quiet, clean, or arranged for show. Wheels grind over stone, voices call for room, sand gathers in the ruts. One jar strikes another inside a cart. It holds. The traffic surges forward again. Barcino is fully awake before we even reach its gate. Ahead stands a wall, but not the massive fortress whose towers still survive in Barcelona today. Those defenses belong to a later and more anxious chapter. In the 2nd century, the first enclosure is lower, simpler, and protected by far fewer towers. It controls who enters and leaves, marks the town's legal boundary, and announces civic status to every traveler approaching from the road. Yet Barcino is not presently braced for siege. The wall is defensive, but it is also symbolic, a stone line between countryside and Roman urban order. Outside lie estates, fields, and long distances. Inside, every doorway, drain, workshop, and public building competes for space. Cross the threshold and the world immediately changes scale. Before we cross the threshold, something unexpected waits beside the sea gate: public baths. Archaeologists have identified 2 separate bath complexes here, built sometime between the mid-1st and early 2nd century. Some researchers suspect they served different groups, perhaps men and women separately, though the evidence won't settle the question. What we do know for certain is where they stood. Travelers could wash the road from their skin here. Sailors, laborers, and residents may have stopped in before the day's business. People could step outside the crowded streets without leaving the town's social life behind. We'll come back when the rooms are hot and full of noise. For now, smoke is only just beginning to curl up from the furnaces below. We pass beneath the gate, and the city folds in around us. The the change is instant. Out there, the land had room to breathe. In here, every meter is claimed. Main streets cut a clear grid through the town, carving it into blocks. Narrower lanes branch off toward houses, shops, workshops, courtyards, and storerooms. Roman surveyors laid down this geometry with a ruler and a plan, but daily life has been chipping away at that perfection ever since. Some stretches of paving are immaculate. Others are patched, dusty, caked in mud. Drains run along the walls. Upper stories rise close above the narrow street. Shop counters shove their goods almost into the path of passers-by. The real Barcino is messier than any archaeological plan on paper, and far more alive because of it. More importantly, the main street ahead is already pointing toward the clue that recently overturned the accepted map. Beneath all this noise, water is moving. Channels carry runoff and waste away, while an engineered supply brings fresh water from beyond the walls. Fragments of Barcino's aqueduct still survive, though its complete route remains uncertain. Drains, basins, mineral deposits, and chemical residues can reveal how particular spaces were used. What they rarely preserve are awnings, shutters, furniture, or faces. Those details must be reconstructed through comparison with the wider Roman world. The foundations are local and secure. The life above them remains a disciplined possibility. The street begins to rise, almost too gently to notice. Mons Tabor is no dramatic hill, but in a town this small, even a slight climb is enough to crown its center with authority. Roofs fall away behind us. Voices begin to carry across open stone. Then sunlight breaks between the buildings, and the city suddenly opens. We are approaching the Forum, the place where worship, law, administration, commerce, reputation, and public memory meet. Every Roman town required a center, but Barcino's was more than an empty square. It was where private interests entered public life, and status became visible. And until very recently, modern scholars had drawn this lost heart facing in the wrong direction. For generations, reconstructions placed the Forum along one accepted axis beneath the Gothic quarter. Then an elevator shaft opened the ground inside a hotel. Excavation began in 2023 during work connected with the expansion of the Grand Hotel Barcino. Archaeologists encountered enormous rectangular slabs cut from Montjuic stone. As the investigation widened, 42 square meters of monumental paving emerged, exceptionally well preserved, and dating to the colony's founding period. When the discovery was announced in 2026, its alignment transformed the map. The Forum followed the decumanus, the axis extending toward the sea and high ground, rather than the orientation long assumed in traditional reconstructions. Barcino's civic center had not merely shifted a few meters. The evidence required a 90-degree turn in how the entire space was understood. The plaza is bright enough to make us squint. Massive slabs form a monumental surface laid flat across ground that was never naturally level. Porticos likely offered shade along parts of the square, though their exact design hasn't survived. Public buildings cluster nearby, spaces for local government, legal hearings, civic records, meetings, ceremony. Don't picture a miniature Roman forum crowded with colossal monuments. Barcino is too small for that kind of theater. Its power comes from concentration instead. Within a few steps, a resident could register a contract, appeal to a magistrate, meet a patron, hear a public announcement, settle a dispute, or watch one of the town's leading families receive a public honor. At the highest point of the town, columns rise above the rooftops. 4 can be seen in modern Barcelona, enclosed inside a later building on Carrer del Paradís. 3 still rise in their original positions. A 4th was reconstructed from surviving elements and returned to the group in 1956. Their shafts and capitals reach roughly 9 meters. They belong to an early imperial temple traditionally associated with Augustus and the imperial cult. No surviving inscription securely records its exact dedication, and the building's orientation remains debated. Years before the newly discovered paving was announced, an academic study had proposed rotating the accepted temple and forum plan by 90 degrees. The excavation beneath the hotel gave striking support to that broader reinterpretation, but it did not erase every uncertainty surrounding the sanctuary. What we show is therefore an evidence-led possibility, a richly finished temple on a high podium, visible across much of Barcino, proclaiming the colony's place within the Roman world. As the sun climbs, the forum grows louder. Messengers arrive from estates beyond the wall. Petitioners linger near officials, waiting their turn. Traders check weights and seals with a practiced eye. Someone reads a document aloud to a small crowd, because not everyone here can read it themselves. Coins change hands constantly, but coins alone don't explain how this economy works. Credit runs on trust. Opportunity runs on family, status, and patronage. Land is still the real foundation of wealth. This square is not simply a marketplace. It's a machine that converts relationships into power. Barcino lives in the shadow of much larger cities. Tarraco, the provincial capital to the southwest, possesses monuments this small colony could never rival. No amphitheater, circus, or grand theater has been securely identified within Barcino's walls. That absence is not a gap to be filled with invented spectacle. Barcino was a compact civic and commercial center connected to a productive countryside and Mediterranean routes. Its strength lay in roads, vineyards, workshops, houses, law, water, local elites, and maritime trade. It did not need a colossal arena to matter. Its success was less theatrical, and perhaps more recognizable because of it. We leave the forum's glare and enter a shaded residential street, where the sound changes at once. Voices feel closer. Metal tools ring from an open workshop. One doorway reveals a small counter facing the street. Farther on, a broader entrance conceals the private world of a wealthier household. Archaeologists have uncovered several elite residences across Roman Barcelona, with courtyards, mosaics, painted plaster, decorated rooms, and evidence of repeated renovation. These buildings were not merely places to sleep. Their architecture controlled access and choreographed encounters. A visitor was made to wait, to look, and to understand the family's rank before meeting its owner. In Barcino, status was not expressed only in the forum. It was built into thresholds, floor patterns, sight lines, and distance. Step into one of these homes, and the first thing you notice is how carefully the view is staged. A visitor is meant to see only certain rooms, certain objects, surfaces chosen to impress. Light spills down through an internal courtyard. Rainwater collects quietly in a basin. Painted plaster covers walls that centuries of ruin have trained us to picture as bare stone. But they were never bare. Not really. Mosaic floors trace patterns beneath sandaled feet. Further in, rooms grow more private, sealed off from casual eyes. The layout is grounded in local excavation. The furniture, textiles, lamps, shutters, and smaller domestic touches draw on evidence from the wider Roman world. The household is larger and more complicated than a modern family unit. Relatives share the building with dependents, clients, servants, enslaved workers, tutors, craftspeople, and visitors. Accounts are checked in one room. Children practice letters in another. Food is prepared while favors are requested in carefully chosen corners. Small domestic acts of worship take place beneath the same roof. Business moves through the house beside kinship, obligation, education, and labor. A domus is a home, an office, a school, a workplace, and a political stage. Its polished rooms depend on labor hidden behind them. For most inhabitants, the morning meal is modest. Bread, fruit, olives, cheese, leftovers from the previous day, and wine diluted with water are more plausible than the endless feasts cinema gives ancient Rome. Amphorae fragments confirm the constant movement of wine, oil, sauces, and other goods through Barcino. They cannot tell us what sat on this exact table. The bowl, the divided loaf, the hand reaching for fruit are informed choices, bounded by the wider Roman record rather than recovered moments. Back on the street, sunlight now cuts between the upper floors. The city has grown warmer, louder, and harder on the nose. A lane near the inner wall leads us into one of the most precisely documented workplaces in all of Barcino. Beneath what is now Plaza del Rey, excavations preserved the remains of a fullonica, a Roman laundry, alongside a dyeing workshop, both active in the 2nd century. Here, the basins, channels, Worn surfaces and residues put us closer to real physical labor than almost anywhere else in this reconstruction. Cloth passes from stage to stage, soaked, agitated, rinsed, stretched, finished. Ash and other alkaline compounds cut through oil and grime. Water is hauled in, then hauled back out. The work is repetitive, skilled, physically brutal, and it produces smells that most reconstructions quietly leave out. But Barcino doesn't tuck its ugliest trades away from wealthy homes and public streets. Workshops, storerooms, houses, and commerce all sit shoulder to shoulder, whether the smell is pleasant or not. Next door, color becomes commerce. Stained vessels and installations indicate a dyeing operation, though excavation cannot recover the exact palette produced on any single day. Roman dyers used materials derived from plants, minerals, and animals, some available locally and others carried across long trade networks. The ancient town was not the gray world left behind by weathered stone. Walls were painted, fabrics carried color, household objects and sacred buildings looked far more varied than their ruins suggest. Yet brilliance was never permanent. Pigments faded, smoke darkened surfaces. Cloth was repaired, reused, and cut apart. Sunlight and dust slowly consumed every shade. Barcino remained colorful only because people continually worked to make it so. Farther along the lane, a merchant's storeroom opens into shadow. Amphorae line the walls, each vessel a small component in an economy extending beyond the town. Wine from the territory around Barcino had already reached Mediterranean markets before the colony's second-century prosperity. Rural estates cultivated vines. Presses transformed grapes. Pottery workshops produced containers. Carts moved filled amphorae toward roads and the coast. Merchants arranged storage, credit, and transport. Ships carried the product outward while other goods returned through the same networks. The container matters almost as much as what it holds. Its shape and clay organize trade and now help archaeologists trace it. Without reliable vessels and transport, the vineyard remains local. With them, a hillside beyond Barcino becomes part of a commercial world stretching across the sea. Beneath Plaza del Rey today, visitors can also see installations for wine and fish processing, but most of that belongs to a later chapter of the city, mainly from the 3rd century onward. They are spectacular remains. But dropping the whole complex into our 2nd century day would be a lie by omission. We can show wine storage, trade, and regional production with confidence. The industrial quarter this site is famous for simply hasn't been built yet, not in this century. Sometimes a disciplined reconstruction gets more accurate by refusing to use its most dramatic image. By midday, heat presses down between the buildings, thick and unmoving. We turn back toward the sea gate, toward the babs we passed hours ago at dawn. They are alive now. Fuel has heated the furnaces through. Water fills the basins. People come here not just to wash, but to talk, to exercise, to wait for the right contact, to trade gossip, to be seen in the right place. Roman bathing is a ritual of the body, but just as much, it's a ritual of politics, status, and time. Inside, the temperature changes from room to room. Clothes and belongings are left near the entrance. Some visitors move from a cooler space toward warmth. Others exercise lightly or remain in conversation. Beneath the heated rooms, raised floors carry hot air through hidden channels. From above, the system appears ingenious. From below, it is relentless labor. Wood must be cut, transported, stacked, and fed into the furnace. Water must be supplied. Ash must be removed. Heat must be watched. If the fire weakens, the system fails quickly. Every comfortable surface depends on workers in the hottest, least impressive part of the building. Public luxury above is powered by fuel, maintenance, and endurance below. Water reveals the same dependence across the town. It enters through engineered infrastructure, supplies public buildings, houses, workshops, and basins, then disappears through drains. Access is unequal. Wealthier households may possess private water features or bathing spaces. Others rely on fountains, wells, shared supplies, stored rainwater, and the baths. Channels clog. Mineral deposits narrow pipes. Masonry leaks. Barcino survives because people clean, patch, finance, and carry water when the system falls short. Roman engineering is impressive, but it never runs by itself. The road leads us beyond the gate once more. Roman burial areas occupied land outside the inhabited enclosure, often lining the approaches to a town. The funerary way preserved today at Plaza de la Villa de Madrid contains monuments used mainly during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, commemorating people from different levels of society, including freed families and members of local associations. Anyone approaching Barcino along this route passed names and memorials before reaching the living city. The road joined commerce with memory. Travelers entered beneath the gaze of people who could no longer cross the gate themselves. In that sense, Barcino began before its wall, where the living, the remembered, and the movement of goods shared the same line of stone. Beyond the memorials, the plain opens wide, and the scale of Barcino's dependence becomes visible. This countryside, not the enclosed town alone, is its economic engine. Roman surveyors divided parts of the territory into measured plots linked by tracks, roads, drainage lines, and water courses. Some researchers argue that elements of this organized landscape influenced later land divisions, though the degree of continuity remains debated. Vineyards occupy some estates. Grain, fruit, vegetables, and livestock support others. Workers repair walls, prune vines, manage water, tend animals, and load carts according to the season. From the Forum, land appears as property and status. Out here, it is weather, soil, labor, and risk. Everything inside the walls depends on this plane. By late afternoon, we pass back through the gate. Shadows stretch long across the paving stones. The workshops are still running, but the rhythm has shifted. Cloth comes up out of the basins. Merchants count what's left in stock. One delivery arrived too late, and we'll simply have to wait for tomorrow. Children dart through lanes that felt more formal this morning. Smoke gathers over the kitchens. The city's rigid grid no longer feels like an imperial diagram. It feels like a set of habits, worn soft by daily use. At the Forum, official business is fading, but the square is not empty. Small groups remain beneath the probable line of the porticos. A final request is made. A document is folded away. Someone leaves satisfied. Someone else must return tomorrow. A decision reached here might alter land beyond the wall, regulate water within it, settle a dispute, or shape a family's standing for generations. The temple columns catch the lowering light. From Mons Tabor, the colony seems to become one organism. Gate, street, forum, house, workshop, bath, road, vineyard, quarry, and sea. For one day, the scattered archaeological remains have rejoined into a living system. Not complete, but coherent enough to walk through. Evening settles over Barcino. Lamps flicker on in doorways one by one. Small, costly, uneven light. The Forum's brightness fades. The bath fires burn low. One last cart rattles through the gate before full dark. Beyond the walls, fields and roadside tombs dissolve into shadow. From the road, we turn back one final time toward this 2nd century town, small enough to walk across in minutes, and complicated enough to hold an entire world inside it. Then, time accelerates. The first wall is absorbed into a far more powerful late Roman defense. From the later 3rd century into the 4th, Barcino reinforces its perimeter with a massive double structure and dozens of towers, using stone taken from earlier buildings and monuments. The modest colony hardens into a stronghold. Its economy changes as well. Wine production and fish processing occupy parts of the quarter now preserved beneath Plaza del Rey. Religious and civic space shifts as Christian communities become increasingly visible. Authority changes form, and political control passes through new hands. Yet there is no clean break in which the town is simply abandoned and replaced. Through disruption and transformation, people remain within the same enclosure, repair the same streets, reuse the same walls, and continue building over earlier lives. Visigothic rule replaces Roman administration. Churches and elite buildings settle into the old grid, almost like new tenants moving into a familiar floor plan. Medieval houses rise directly against the Roman walls. Streets narrow, bend, take on new names, yet so many of them still trace the ancient lines beneath. The Forum is buried and forgotten. The temple is stripped down to fragments. The coastline itself pushes outward as the shore is reshaped. Barcino does not vanish in one dramatic catastrophe. It is simply, gradually, absorbed into Barcelona. Generation after generation of builders treat the Roman city as a foundation, a boundary line, a quarry, sometimes just an obstacle in the way. The old wall becomes the back wall of a house. A tower gets folded into a palace. Columns vanish inside ordinary rooms. Workshops are sealed beneath new floors, layer after layer. Ironically, each generation preserves some ancient structure precisely because it never treats it as a monument. These fragments survive for one of two reasons. They stayed useful, or everyone simply forgot they were there. Now the view pulls back, rising above the walls entirely. The tight Roman grid becomes a faint outline beneath the medieval city. Barcelona pushes past its old defenses, fills the plain, swallows neighboring settlements, climbs toward the hills, reshapes the coast. Roads become avenues, fields become city blocks, railways slice through the ground, tunnels bore past foundations laid down almost 2,000 years earlier. The ancient city disappears from view, but never from the structure of the one standing on top of it. And then, beneath the Gran Hotel Barcino, an elevator shaft opens the ground. Monumental paving first appears during work begun in 2023. Archaeologists document great slabs of Montjuic stone, hydraulic features, fragments of imported marble, and layers representing almost 2 millennia of occupation. The decisive clue is not an object that can be lifted into a display case. It is direction. The paving follows the decumanus, the axis extending toward the sea and high ground, rather than the orientation long accepted for the Forum. When the discovery is announced in 2026, the center of Roman Barcelona must be drawn again. The Forum can now be placed and aligned with much greater confidence, while the position and form of surrounding buildings still demand further study. One answer beneath the hotel immediately creates new questions. What we have walked through is not recovered footage of the 2nd century. It is a reconstruction assembled from factions, streets, walls, drains, basins, residues, surviving columns, and comparison with other Roman settlements. Some activities are anchored to the exact places where archaeology found them. Other details, a stall's awning, furniture, baskets, faces, the color of a garment, restore human scale without pretending to be discoveries. The evidence defines the limits. Imagination is allowed only inside them. Today, Barcelona is famous for reinventing itself. Roman, medieval, industrial, modernist, and contemporary cities occupy the same ground, each pressing up through the layer before it. Yet the oldest center of all still has the power to change direction. Beneath a palace, the basins of ancient workshops remain where people once used them. Inside a later building, 3 temple columns still rise where Roman builders placed them, joined by a 4th reassembled from surviving fragments. Beneath a hotel, the Forum has quietly turned 90 degrees, and somewhere below another ordinary floor, a single fragment might still be waiting, ready to move a street, transform a building, or redraw the whole city all over again. Barcino isn't simply buried beneath Barcelona. It's still shaping what Barcelona becomes. The lost city has not finished revealing its map, and the next step of this journey may already be waiting, hidden beneath the footsteps passing overhead right now. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.